what this means to enterprise, traditional organization, to think about that to an AI native organization. What's really the shift you're seeing there?
It's a new way of building, it's a new way of distributing, it's a new way of collaborating, and it has to be thought top down and bottoms up.
That's very interesting.
It's not a small team it's not just the responsibility of the innovation team. The leadership has to drive it top down. And those are some of the factors where we see that there has been an early wave of a lot of pilots and experimentation, a lot of which has not seen light of the day.
You see AI native organizations, that's new age organizations.
Do we use an existing software? Do we just build our own? Because now we can build our own software that's custom made. So the AI native organization, and again, one of the big factors there also is that AI native organizations they are thinking about AI almost like electricity. It's something that we need to use to pretty much do most of the things that we need to do, versus the legacy organizations think of AI as this new thing we need to try out. And that's where I think there is a difference, and a lot of it is driven again top down. In the obvious follow question to this would be, what does it take for companies that are pre-2023 to go through that transition? And the biggest factor is the leadership, is the management motivated? Do they have a point of view on how to use AI, how to experiment with it, and how to transition from the current structure to an AI native organization? And that's a non-trivial problem.
Interesting. Welcome to One MOAR Take. This is Mohith Mohan. I'm the CEO of MOAR Advisory. I'm really excited about these conversations that I bring with leaders who are really disrupting the world in many ways. I think as we think about enterprises, I think it's getting shaped in new forms. I have several conversations with leaders, and one thing that stands out is the organization of the future and the workforce of the future is going to look different. So these series of podcasts, I'm hoping, is going to help us reimagine what this future state looks like. And today I'm really excited. I have with me Shobhit Shukla here. Shobhit, welcome. I initially thought I'm going to introduce you myself, but I think I will not do that honor. But I would like you to give me a little bit about who you are, about what you're doing with Evam Labs. I think it's really exciting with the list of product line that you're building out there. So maybe I'm going to pass it on to you, and then I'm going to come back. Yeah.
First of all, thanks for having me, Mohit. Really good to be in this setting. We are not used to being in such a formal setup as we'll talk about later. But we started Evam Labs a few years ago, and Evam is a Sanskrit word which means hence or continuation. And it's really a continuation for me and the team that works with me on a lot of the work that we have spent over a decade working on. So Evam Labs is an applied AI research lab. The idea is we pick large business problems and we work really hard to figure out how we can build solutions which come with certain technological breakthroughs. And once that happens, we create ventures out of it. And the idea and the mission that Evam Labs is on is, how do we operationalize AI over the next few years for 10,000 plus institutions, the most important institutions of the century? That's the goal, that's the mission, and that's the mission that we're on right now.
Great. Thank you, Shobhit, and pleasure to have you again on this show. I thought a good way to really start off this conversation is to actually talk about something that's fundamental. And most organizations today, as I'm speaking to them, whether here in India or enterprises across, I think the conversation seems to continuously revolve around AI. Yeah. But one thing what I'm also hearing, what I'm seeing is those conversations are largely revolving around pilots, use cases, application of tools, not necessarily in terms of how it's actually looking at an enterprise-wide application of AI. In many ways, enterprises, of course, have a legacy. They've been built with a lot of aspects around culture, intangibles, and of course, I would say enterprise systems, which tend to be sometimes monolithic in terms of how they kind of need to shift. But having said that, I would love to get your perspective today as we think about what this means to enterprises, and for a traditional organization to think about that to an AI native organization. What's really the shift you're seeing there?
So, first of all, Mohit, you have worked with some of these Fortune 500 companies, so you probably know this better than most that when you are on X and you see how fast AI is progressing, the AI build population feels that AI has solved and will continue to solve all the problems that exist. But anyone that has worked at a large organization, anyone that has tried to sell to a large organization would know that that's far from the truth. That's not how large companies operate. What we have seen is the intent is higher this time with AI than it was when the cloud shift was happening or when we were moving from feature phones to smartphones. Intent is significantly higher. There is clear recognition that we need to do something. The trick there then is how do you, and that's why you see a lot of these pilots that are proof of concepts that are happening. But the challenge there is how do you move from experimentation pilots to something that goes into production, and there it becomes a question of something that is delivering clear ROI. There are a number of factors to consider. The first one being large companies are very complex adaptive systems, so there are a lot of things at play. It's not as simple as to say that if my technology works better than what you're using, you should replace it. That's not how they work. One of the things we've seen, which is a recurring pattern, unfortunately, is that um, a lot of the experimentation and pilots that happen, they happen more to check the box that we're doing something on AI. There's not enough thought that is given to what is the objective, what is the goal that we want to achieve, and how would we measure success? How would we measure the return on this investment that we are making? The other aspect also is that given the pace at which things are changing in AI, you need to give, as an organization, room for both speed and experimentation. Speed is very important. So, unlike the traditional software product development roadmap, where you could have a plan for 12 months and say, okay, we'll check in every quarter, you can't do that in AI. So, you need to have a certain expectation of speed and velocity. And that obviously means that you can't have very large teams working on it at the same time. And then, secondly, you need to give enough buffer space and room for the teams to experiment and potentially fail within certain guardrails. If, as a large organization, you say that you get the budget to do the AI deployment, but make sure you don't fail, the success rate is 100%. Anyone that has used AI in any small capacity also will tell you that's unrealistic. I mean, there is a lot of experimentation that has to happen. And then the final thing I would say is that a lot of that structural change comes about if it's the top-down leadership that is driving it. If it's AI is not, it's not a collaboration tool where you have three options and you ask three teams to experiment with each of them and you say which we'll pick the winner and then we'll just go with it. That's not how AI is. It's a new way of building. It's a new way of distributing. It's a new way of collaborating, and it has to be thought top down and bottoms up. It's not a small team that. It's not just the responsibility of the innovation team. The leadership has to drive it top down, and those are some of the factors where we see that there has been an early wave of a lot of pilots and experimentation, a lot of which has not seen light of the day. But on the other end, we are also starting to see that realization. And now, when we are doing pilots or when we meet with customers who are looking to do pilots, whether it's with us or someone else, there's a structural change in which how they're approaching those pilots.
That's very interesting. So, from your perspective, what I'm hearing you say is yes, those POCs, those experimentation is important for enterprises but also it's important that you have speed kind of married
Yeah.
to that. So it's almost like you fail fast, fail cheap, but you keep the engine moving.
Correct.
And it's not necessarily a mandate of the, let's call it the VP of innovation, but it's an institutional mandate if you're
Yes.
driving this. And just as a follow up to that, do you see AI native organizations, it's new age organizations, in some ways have been built on an emerging tech stack, having that advantage to the larger enterprises, to the point, again, that there's a lot of legacy. The aspect of speed we just spoke about is maybe in some ways hindering the pace of growth.
100%. In fact, this is an interesting thought experiment to do when you meet, forget about a large company, but even when you meet a startup, an important question to ask is, when did they start? Did they start pre 2023 or post 2023? And majority of the companies that have started post 2023, you would see that there is a way and a manner in which they've gone about building the organization. Typically, you'll see these teams are organized in a manner that is very flat. So the communication happens, information travels very fast. The individual groups that are working on specific initiatives are very small pods or teams, because when the company would have started, they would have realized that a lot can be achieved with a highly motivated and hardworking group of 3-4 people. You don't need a team of 12-15 people. And then you will see that a lot of these organizations are really optimizing for velocity. And of course, there is a room for failure. Startups have that by definition, but you just see more of that in companies that are, as you described them, AI native. Their first port of call generally is, how do we use AI to be able to do what we want to do? And I'm not just talking about generating code, because that's now table stakes. Although there are a lot of caveats and riders around that as well, which I was just telling you earlier, that we are also learning that it is table stakes, but it has to be used thoughtfully. But it goes beyond that, where if I need to collect data, if I need to design our outbound strategy, if I need to have our own CRM system that tightly integrates with our outbound strategy, do we use an existing software? Do we just build our own? Because now we can build our own software that's custom made. So the AI native organization, and again, one of the big factors there also is that AI native organizations are, they are thinking about AI almost like electricity. It's something that we need to use to pretty much do most of the things that we need to do, versus the legacy organizations think of AI as this new thing we need to try out. And that's where I think there is a difference. And a lot of it is driven, again, top down. In the obvious follow question to this would be, what does it take for companies that are pre 2023 to go through that transition? And the biggest factor is the leadership, is the management motivated? Do they have a point of view on how to use AI, how to experiment with it, and how to transition from the current structure to an AI native organization? And that's a non-trivial problem. The bigger the company, the harder that process is.
That's well said. I couldn't have thought about it in a better manner that you have articulated that, Shobhit. But one of the things that kind of, if I would say, pivots us to the part about AI tools. I think you spoke about code and generating code. There are two aspects to it. I think enterprises today, there is a fear of the unknown, the risks that come with it. And the second part of it is also the fact that, do we stop at investing in tools? And that's also, I'm sure you're seeing that today enterprises are looking at, if we give tools to an engineer, they're going to be more productive. Right? Yeah. So that's the premise under which I think organizations largely are thinking about their investments in AI. And they're hoping that that's going to yield certain results. But would love to get your perspective on two things. One is the risks as enterprises embark on this journey. Where do they put those guardrails, especially the larger ones? And the second is, how do they go beyond, let's call it, these tools? Because in some ways, it's not just the tool set. I think it's the mindset of the leadership team and the organization and the skill set as well. Because not everyone is a AI native engineer, right? Most of them are learning as we speak. So just your thoughts on that journey.
So I think one of the most important things to consider is, with AI, you could either automate the existing processes, which is the easier starting point. And that's where you see a lot of coding assistants come in. Engineers are writing code, let them start using these coding assistants. They can automate a large part of it. But a slightly different way of thinking about this would be, what is the larger objective at hand? Why is the person doing what he or she is doing? And if we were to take an example of, let's say, a marketer that is running marketing activities, marketing campaigns, the goal for them is to either drive brand awareness or to sell their product or service. That's the objective. The rest of the things, the way the systems are designed, the way they have licensed some of the software tools, more marketing automation platforms, the way the teams are structured, is to achieve that goal. So instead of looking at what a set of individuals in that structure are doing and say that, oh, you are downloading some of these creatives and then you're uploading it in Meta, let us automate that process. A better place to start is to go back to the end objective, which in this case for a marketer is you either want to drive brand awareness or you want to sell your product. So if we were to redesign this whole process to achieve that objective, how would we go about doing that? And if you think about it from that frame of reference, it's very likely that you will end up with a very different answer, which is that yes, you should use the tools, but the tools are a means to a larger end. They are not the end in themselves. Oftentimes, we conflate the two things where we say that, okay, because we are using Codex or Claude, we are an AI organization. You're not. In fact, you might end up introducing a lot of AI slop and technical debt over time if you just get your team relying too much on vibe coding, which is for another discussion. But so that I think is the framing is very, very important. And you can't have an individual who is in the marketing team doing this to be able to make that decision. That decision has to be made by someone who's running the overall marketing strategy. And that's where the top down, how to frame the problem and then define how you use AI becomes very important. And then the other thing which is also important is when it comes to the risks, the agents, for example, when you talk about AI agents, they are very capable. When you deploy AI, it can do a lot of things, it can make a lot of autonomous decision making. But generally, how I think some of these things will progress is if you think about any organization and humans in general, we do things in a bit of a loop. So we make decisions and then we act. We make decisions, then we act. There's some feedback, and then we make again such set of decisions, and we act. I think we are going to see a phase where we will use AI to take action, to execute, because decision making, I think we're still going to retain as humans till such time we build trust. And I don't know what that chasm is going to be, at which point large organizations say that, okay, decision making also can be handled by AI. It's probably going to be sometime in the future, not anytime soon. And then the second part, which is also very important, is security, which is why that's a part of the technology industry it's a gift that keeps giving, because the more capable technology becomes, the more important cybersecurity becomes. And I think that's going to become even more important in the age of AI.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. And actually, that was my follow-up question. When as organizations are embracing this, in some ways, the trust deficit that probably what it was 2 years ago, in some ways that's building. So there is a level of trust that I think organizations are building with AI. And to your point, I think the decision making is still very close to the center in terms of how organizations are thinking about holding the decision making. But to your point, that pivot or that point of inflection, do you see that from your vantage point for some of the products you're building, right? Do you see that actually translating?
So it will take some time. And the reason I think is going to take some time, and this is where the AI build technologists sort of miss the ball a little bit compared to people who are deep in the trenches and working. If you talk to someone who's selling cookies and shampoos as part of a CPG brand and is going door to door to different retailers and selling stuff, his job requires a lot of contextual understanding that AI agents will not have anytime soon. There's a path to that, but the guy who's going and knows what kind of flavors of cookies to sell in a particular part of the city or to a set of retail stores, he's been doing it for years and he knows it the back of his hand. So there is a lot of, and you can find parallels to this in any large organization as well. There's a lot of tribal knowledge that exists in our heads because we've been working on things and subconsciously we've just built that knowledge base. So the way I feel, and again, I don't know the answer, but I feel the way this is going to progress is AI is going to be an aid to humans to make better decisions in the short term. We are starting to see that happen where, for example, when we're deploying some of our solutions with the retailers, they use some of our capabilities and agents to be able to figure out what is happening in the vicinity of the store. And based on that, should I stock up some part of my inventory or should I staff up some people because we expect more foot traffic? But the decisioning is still made by the store manager. It's aided by the agent, but the store manager takes the final call. And the reason for that is the way a store manager in Manhattan is going to make that decision versus someone in the countryside is going to make a decision for a store in a strip mall is very different. And we don't have that know-how. Only the store manager knows because he knows the area. He knows that if there is a certain kind of event that's happening down the street, how many people or what kind of foot traffic is it going to lead to, and how should I prepare for it. And there's going to take a while for the store manager to be able to encode that knowledge into the agent. The agent will learn, but it'll take some time. And the agent has to learn, and then it has to prove and gain trust of the store manager that yes, now I can make this decision on your behalf. And it's only in certain scenarios where the stakes are very high that I'll come to you for approval. So I think it's a gradual process. It might take a few years. We'll eventually get there. And the goal with all of these things always, Mohit, is, in my view at least, is that you start with a certain set of tasks. Agents continue to improve. And as agents improve, it's not like humans become redundant. Humans can start moving to higher order tasks. The same store manager can potentially manage multiple stores if he doesn't have to get into the nitty-gritty of every small decision that he needs to make.
Yeah, no, well said. It kind of, when you spoke about cookies and shampoos, it got me thinking, and I think it's a good segue to the topic that when I was talking to one of my colleagues about this, which is something that I know you're working on very closely with Profius on physical AI,
Yeah.
right? So when you spoke about stores and cookies, I mean, it got me thinking. But just for the physical AI, I think is it's a very interesting concept. Would love, maybe just for the benefit of everyone, if you can just talk through what is physical AI, just so everybody is able to relate to it.
Yep. Physical AI is we strongly believe that's the next frontier after large language models in AI, and the reason for that is that large language models are trained on this vast corpus of internet data, but they have limited grounding in the real world. If you're operating and running a real business, whether it's retail or you're a CPG company that's selling products, or you're a real estate developer, or you're the government that wants to figure out where do I invest in terms of healthcare or schools, you need access to real world data. And so physical AI has a few different parts to it. There's a lot of work that's happening on the robotics side. What Profius is focusing on and working on is what we call as the cognition layer, which is, so robotics does a lot of work on perceiving the world. So robots perceive the world and then they act. But what we are working on with Profius is building the cognition layer so that we can actually build a deep understanding of the physical spaces. And if you're able to achieve that, then hopefully we'll be able to support a lot of use cases, right from how retailers can increase revenue per store, respond better to the external events that are happening, to CPG companies talking the right kind of product categories and SKUs, to governments being able to make more informed decisions on how to do capital investment, real estate developers being able to price the assets in the right way, telecom operators being able to lay the right kind of fiber optic line in the right communities. So there's a lot, pretty much any real world decision that gets impacted by what's happening in the physical spaces, our goal is to be able to provide a real world model that can answer those questions. And that's what physical AI is.
Interesting. So I'm just curious, the next time I go into my favorite coffee shop and I'm sitting there, I heard you say that there is, the data that exists in the physical world, both knowing me as a customer as well as for the enterprise on how they can have better sell through. I think that's going to be the, let's say, the future frontier. But
Yes.
but what do you think would be some of the, you spoke about some of the even government applications. I think that was interesting as well. But from a customer experience standpoint,
Yeah.
what do you think, how this is actually going to benefit?
So if I go back to the retail example itself, one of the challenges that a lot of our retail customers face is how, I mean, retail stores, and you've done a lot of work with retail, so you know this very well. They have a very good handle on what's happening within the four walls, so within the retail store, what kind of products are stocked, how many people are walking in, etc. But what they lack is what's happening in the surroundings of the neighborhood. What are the things that are happening? And depending on whether you're in a dense area like Singapore or Manhattan, where something down the block could have an impact, versus you're on a freeway 280 where something that is 5 miles out could also have an impact. If there's an event that's happening in AT&T Stadium, it might actually lead to a traffic going to your store. Ultimately, all of the knowledge of what's happening and how that could impact what's going to happen in your store and how you prepare for it to respond to and lead to better experience for your customers when they walk in, That's what you're trying to solve. And historically, the problem with doing that has been that one, you need to collect data at scale, which has been hard, but now it's possible with AI agents. And secondly, someone needs to keep analyzing the data. If an event is happening, it'll have a very different impact on Chick-fil-A versus on a Gap store, because those are two very different. And even within fast food, what we've learned is if it's a pizza takeout place versus it's a burger place, it'll have very different kind of impact for the same event that's happening in the vicinity. And that kind of discernment and to be able to learn and contextualize that is something that AI agents can do, which till now was not possible. You needed humans to do it, and that was part of the challenge.
Very interesting. And talking about, I think just pivoting a little bit from the physical AI, data, I think, is going to be really the quintessential layer for us as we think about what we do with the data. But you spoke about agentic AI. So maybe what does that take? Because a lot of it today, conversations are shifting to autonomous decision making. And I know we spoke a little bit about it earlier in terms of are we ready to let go when it comes to decision making? So if you were to kind of draw this saying, I have the data that's available from the real world, to how I can actually put that to use using agentic AI, just maybe walk me through what that could look like, Shobhit.
Yeah, that's a very important question, and I think it's the way we think about it when we put ourselves in the position of a large enterprise that is probably operating a few thousand stores is we don't want to start by saying that we can deploy agents and they can take all the decisions for you, because we know that's factually going to be suboptimal and highly risky. Reason being, people who are working in any organization, it could be a CPG company, it could be retail, it could be a bank, it could be government, they have years of collective wisdom and context about their business, which no matter how capable AI becomes, it will not have, because it has not seen, it has not trained on your own history of your first party data. So there is a certain kind of, think of it like an employee. A new employee is joining you, he or she takes a few months of onboarding and there's a learning curve. And that learning curve is going to be there for AI agents as well. So it's not as simple as to say that you deploy and you can just hand over everything. So there's that contextual knowledge or the tribal knowledge that AI needs to learn. And how fast that can happen, how well that can happen is still an open question. We don't have enough longitudinal data to be able to say conclusively that 6 months or 36 months of investment and you're there. And then the second part, which is something we discussed earlier, is cybersecurity as well. How do you build these systems in a way that it does not lead to a complete catastrophe? Because the stakes are really high. So on one vector, you have how capable these agents become and how soon can they start to learn the nuances of your business, the context of your business. And on the other vector, you also need to consider risks around security, trust and safety, and how fast can that layer, that vector grow, so that combining both of these, you are able to build enough trust and confidence and reliability to say that. And I think it's going to be a gradual thing. It'll not be a discrete quantum leap where a Fortune 500 company one day wakes up and says that, okay, from today, everything is going to be run by AI. All decisions are going to be made by AI. It's probably going to be a very, very gradual process. And I think therein lies the opportunity for companies that are helping organizations that adopt AI, because it's a long journey. It's not like cloud migration, which also, by the way, took a decade plus for it to really happen at scale. I think this is going to it's going to be a multi-decadal journey for us to be able to see large-scale organizations realize the full potential of AI.
Yeah, it's not a turn on and a turn off of the switch for sure. And one of the things you said, I think I caught on to that, is really around application. And when enterprises today are experimenting, doing POCs, from your vantage point, Shobhit, have you seen any, if I would say, use cases seeing the light of the day in any of the sectors, that's CPG or retail, that's real, that a enterprise actually sees true benefit or value beyond what I would call as some of the enablers that, from an agentic perspective, that exist, but real, where it's helping you probably help grow the top line, as an example, or bring better quality of customer data into the organization. So, any such examples you're seeing today from where your vantage point?
So maybe I'll give you an example of a large retailer with whom we are working on a couple of initiatives. So when they think about growth, it's two factors. One is we have existing stores. How do we generate more revenue from the existing stores? Second is they're also growing at a fairly fast clip in new territories. So using this real world data, the first thing that we're doing is for their existing stores, we are helping them take better decisions at a store manager level on a day-to-day basis. If there is going to be a weather anomaly which is going to lead to less number of people walking into the stores, or if there is a competitor that has launched a promotional activity that is likely to lead to 30 to 40% impact on our store traffic, and hence to mitigate that I need to launch some of my own promotional activity. So we are still working through the cumulative impact we can drive, because you need to look at a slightly longer horizon. But on our early signs clearly suggest that there is a clear delta that they are able to see, which the store managers were not able to deliver, because a human cannot react to on a day-to-day basis the events that are happening. They don't even know what kind of promotional activity a competitor is running until a few days or weeks later. The second part is where we are helping them drive growth is what are the territories or areas where you should be looking to expand into or open new stores. Those are again long horizon, capital intensive bets, but they actually drive meaningful growth. And the signals that we look at for those is not just where there is latent demand, but also what is the level of competitor activity, what kind of foot traffic these competitors are seeing in their stores, and looking at all of these signals, the agents are able to make a recommendation, and the probability of success that these are the potential areas that you should consider to open your new stores. And this should be the format. So in a lot of, particularly in quick service restaurant, you have different formats. You have a small format, you have a dine-in format, you have a delivery or takeout format as well. So it also recommends you the format. And again, that's long horizon, but generally what we are seeing is these are use cases where we start with an objective. The objective is to increase revenue per store, or the objective is to drive growth by identifying and opening new store locations that can be highly profitable. And then we work backwards from there to see how agents can help address that.
Interesting. Uh, One of the things when you're talking about autonomous agents, and uh, I do think fundamentally the way I look at it, organizations exist for profit, but they also exist to serve their employees and the communities that they live in, and which I think brings to the point that you said earlier, Shobhit, which is, if you look at post 2023, yes, those organizations, startups, enterprises have had the benefit of, I would say, learning from the wisdom of the past.
Yeah.
But it's not true for the large enterprises that's been had decades, some of them over a century, that's been around. So I'm just bringing the people aspect into this, right? Do you see actually structures, layers, skills, of course, getting disrupted as we look, almost stargaze? I know sometimes that's the question I think we all keep asking ourselves. But does this mean there's a new world that's forming with how we're thinking about this? The what I would call the agentic world and the future of really this organizations or enterprises.
That is for sure. What that looks like and how much pain it causes in the short term, I think is the question. And I actually think of it from the following frame of reference, that these are large organizations. They are employing people who are doing white collar work, and many of them are employing a large number of people that are doing blue collar work.
Yeah.
Now, as it turns out, AI agents are already disrupting a lot of the knowledge work, the white collar work. It's a matter of time before we have robots that will also start disrupting a lot of blue collar work. If you had to take any large organization, if you had to start that, if you're the CEO and you were given the freedom to start it today, you would do it fundamentally very differently, because you would start to think about an organizational structure where you'll start by saying that, let me see what all can be done by these agents and robots, and then I'll augment that with humans. And that doesn't mean that your workforce will reduce. It'll probably end up increasing, even though you have these agents and robots because you're able to do so much more. So, for a lack of a better term, the average ROI or throughput that you're able to see per employee becomes a function of how you are structured as an organization and what kind of objectives you're going after. So, all of this to say that it's not an easy problem, and I certainly am not, I would say, qualified enough to be in that, put myself in the position to say that this is how they should go about doing it. But what I do know is that to bring about that kind of change, the level of commitment and the level of seriousness and the level of long horizon thinking that is required by the management as well as the board of these companies, or many of these are publicly run companies, so they have the added pressure of quarterly targets. They often underestimate that it requires serious commitment, multi-year thinking, and a deep conviction, which you may not have. And that's partly the reason why I think you see a lot of these founder-led companies that are able to make these incredible moves. Of course, Elon Musk is one of the best examples, but even Salesforce, they just announced this new initiative which is called Headless 360, I think, where they said that we'll open up access to our CRM database to agents and MCP. Now, would that have happened if Benioff was not running the company? I don't know.
Yeah. So, yeah, no, very interesting perspective. And, I think, Shobhit, it kind of, I thought it's a good moment. I know you're speaking about retail, you've spoken about quick service restaurant, burgers and pizzas. I would love to, kind of also think about from, you work with several retailers, CPG companies. What do you think is the biggest transformation that's happening there? And just curious in terms of what is it that it takes for these enterprises to actually make that shift when you think about a retail transformation as an example?
Well, that's a good question. And generally, one interesting pattern that we're observing is, which I will mention here, is a couple of years ago, a lot of the emphasis when it came to AI was on optimizing their existing costs. So a lot of our conversations used to be around we have this process, how do we automate this, or how do we cut costs, and how do we make this more efficient. Fast forward 2 years in 2026 and beyond, I think a lot of our conversations are not about cost optimization. They are actually more about how do we use this to drive growth, because that is what will move the needle for us. So from saying that we can automate XYZ, going back to the retail example you were discussing earlier, a lot of the conversation is about if we had to expand into new territories, if we had to increase our product assortment into new categories, what would those look like, and how is that going to impact revenue? Or are there things that are happening in the vicinity of our stores which we are not catering to and hence leaving money on the table? Is that going to lead to, let's say, 200 basis points increase in revenue at a store level? If I'm running 5,000 stores, that is meaningful revenue over a period of a few years. So I would say that is one of the most noticeable and positive changes that we have seen in terms of how these discussions used to play out 2 years ago versus they're happening now. And I think we are sort of getting closer to a point where they say that, okay, our objective is to drive growth. Not necessarily, of course, we want to cut costs, but if we drive growth, then a lot of other things get taken care of. So let's start with that and then work backwards to see what we need to do to be able to achieve that.
Interesting. And if I have to double down, since retail is something that's close to us, Shobhit, I'm just curious. We spoke about autonomous agents, and in the examples you spoke about, like the store manager, or with regard to planning, inventory management, pricing, promotion. There are different aspects to it. Do you see certain areas of core retail that are more, if I would say, opportune for where you can actually apply autonomous agents there?
Yeah, so the one that I think comes to the forefront is marketing, customer acquisition. That is an area, marketing for any part of a traditional business tends to be more technology forward. They need to be, because media consumption habits have moved to digital over the past 2.5 decades. So they are fast forward, and they generally are more comfortable with and open to adopting AI. And if you do marketing the right way, it's easier for you to demonstrate ROI. If you're able to acquire more customers, they flow through your lead gen funnel, they show up in your stores, orders order conversion funnel on your website or your app increases, it's very easy to measure. So those conversations tend to be really at the forefront when it comes to driving growth or using AI or AI agents. The other one is sort of related, which is also around customer promotions and events, which drives traffic into the store, because that tends to be omni-channel, and it is also again very much driven by the activities that are happening in the vicinity of the store, or what is it that the competitors are doing, what kind of promotions the competitors are running. Um, Other than that, the the store level operations is something that tends to be not very technologically savvy, and that's the part that is very, what I would call as the long tail. It really depends on the store manager, and that is where, while they are not technologically very savvy, what we are seeing is AI can play a significant role to bring a certain level of uniformity. The store performance gets very much anchored to the store manager, and if the store manager is great, the store will do well. If it's not, then, and so with AI, it actually counterintuitively brings the opportunity for you to make it a level playing field, because they're all aided by technology, by AI. So even your bottom 10 percentile store manager can actually perform above the median, because he or she has all the information that he or she needs, and oftentimes recommendations on what they can do to be able to address the opportunity.
Interesting. And as we're speaking, Shobhit, one of the things that at least gets me to start thinking about is, we have volumes of data today with, I think the example you shared about physical AI. There's obviously agents in play. There's autonomous decision making. Are we looking at a different operating system as we look into the future? Which means there is traditional systems, or how organizations are organized today, are going to look very different when you look at it in the future. So your if I would say vision of what that operating system could look like as we stargaze again into the future.
Yeah, and this is something that we think about a lot. Historically, the way this stack emerged, especially in the US, the foundational data layer, which was earlier, it was on-prem and then eventually shifted to cloud, that then is followed up with what I would call as the broadly as the analytics layer, where you had a whole number of companies and innovation that happened. They invested in building their own data science and data analytics capabilities. And on top of that, the more mature organizations then built their own machine learning models and data scientists. And then the final layer was the what I would call as the software industrial complex, the SaaS layer. So that's where the visualization, the workflows happened. Now, each of these layers over the years, you can imagine that's going to fundamentally get transformed. So you'll have the data layer, but it's not just going to be an organization's internal data. It's also going to be a lot of external data that you will have access to through the models. Through large language models, you have access to all of the data that's there on the internet, and all of the knowledge. Through companies like Profius, you'll have access to a lot of the external signals as well. The analytics layer itself is going to get transformed significantly, because instead of just running predefined workflows, you can have AI agents that can, of course, run those workflows, but they can do a lot more. So they can analyze, they can extract insights, and they can come up with recommendations. And so in the short term, I feel that the software layer might remain, and unfortunately, that's why you see a lot of these SaaS stocks are also tanking, because the fundamental belief is that the software interface might still remain, the BI interface might still remain, but instead of a human looking at all those charts and then trying to figure out what to do with it, you probably will have the agents upstream that will be analyzing all the data and then just telling you, these are the this is what is happening, these are the 5 options you have. Based on the context that you have of the business, you can decide which of these 2 or 3 that you want to act on. So the human still has certain amount of agency to make decisions, but a lot of the heavy lifting will get done by these agents, and thanks to all this data that we have access to. So this whole stack itself, in a way, I think is going to get transformed. Of course, it's not going to happen in a matter of a few months or years. This is a very long horizon journey. But at the end of it, in the fullness of time, I think we are going to find that a lot of the cognitive work ends up happening upstream of that final interface that humans see.
Wow, that's I think I couldn't have said that better. So, but that kind of gets me to the what I would say the last part, and my favorite part, Shobit, is when I embarked on this journey as an entrepreneur, I think the biggest thing was about staying the course, the discipline, making sure that you show up
Yeah.
every single day, because I see my role more as a cheerleader than anything else. And for you, I think for someone who's been there way longer, you've seen different parts, including taking an organization IPO. Uh, I think one thing I know we share in common is about fitness, right? So, would love for your perspective, right? How, it's not about the sprint, but running that marathon, right? How you kind of stayed the course and really helped yourself, and in the process, help people around you in this journey.
So since you said it's not a sprint but running a marathon, I don't know if you saw the London Marathon yesterday. The guy actually ran a marathon like a sprint. He covered it in less than 2 years, so 2 hours. So I don't even know if that phrase has that kind of same meaning. But jokes aside, I think, look, you are there in the gym before I reach every morning. So I think you are, if anything, you are more inspiring, and you show up. And I think that phrase of showing up really encapsulates our belief. And my co-founder, my friend Srijan, says this all the time, that discipline is all about doing things when you don't feel like doing them. Because if you feel like doing them, everyone will do it. There's no alpha there. The alpha happens when you don't feel like doing it and still go and do it anyway. And that's sort of a common theme when you study some of the high performing athletes over time, that what differentiates a Djokovic from anyone else is just his ability to keep going, and just having that extreme discipline, because he knows that he wants to be at the top for as long as he has. And those are the cues that I personally take, and that's sort of how we have molded or tried to mold the organization and the team as well. The strong belief is that we are going through this very unprecedented kind of shift that's happening. Of course, there's a lot of geopolitical upheaval as well, but technology is changing, and it's going to have real meaningful impact. In such times, you need to be in in a position where you can sustain a certain level of velocity and momentum for a really long period of time. So it's not going all out and just burning out in 6 months, because that doesn't help anyone. And that's where athletes are, these amazing athletes who've figured out longevity, like Djokovic, for example, are such amazing examples. Like, how do they stay at the top for such a long period of time? They have figured out that right balance between going at a certain velocity and just maintaining that, and that happens with discipline. And so, in at Evam Labs, for example, our motto is do hard things fast. So we try to work on hard problems, but we also try to move as fast as possible with extreme ownership and high sense of urgency. And I know that, now having kids, I've realized and come to know that kids don't do what you tell them to do. They do what you do. So, and I think it's the same for the team as well. If I don't do it myself, I can't expect them to do it. And if I do it every day and if I show up every day, then at least there is some hope that at least some of them will do it. So, yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, in many ways, I call this as a since we spoke about operating system, this is like the founder's operating system.
Yeah.
But I also think one of the most, and I was on my feed yesterday, I was listening into what you said. So I think your team was shared birthday wishes, and you spoke about the 9 to 5,
Yeah.
and then the 5 to 9,
Yeah.
right? And I think in many ways, I think that encapsulates really that it's your whole self. This is
Yes.
not, you're not time boxing to say this is me here
Yeah.
at work, this is me at
Right.
home, and this is me at maybe at a social event. So I think that's really well said, Shobhit. And we typically end the session. This is my one opportunity I get to put you on the spot. So I'm going to, if you're okay with it, I'm going to put you there. And maybe I'm not even going to ask you for permission. But since we've been speaking about AI, maybe I'm going to keep to the theme of AI. So the way you think about this is a rapid fire. Think about the first thing that comes to your mind, one sentence or maybe a word that kind of strikes you when I ask these questions. So let me know if you're ready. I'm going to start shooting at you.
Sure.
Yep, great. Okay, here we go. So one AI tool or capability every organization should be exploring today.
I'm biased. I would say Poiro, because that's a tool we've developed. It's an amazing content generation engine. Everyone should try it.
Okay, one thing organizations should stop doing when it comes to AI.
Over reliance on AI.
One capability that will define high performing teams in the next few years.
Uh, Being focused on overall wellness and thinking of yourself as an athlete, a sports athlete. Yeah.
Love that analogy. One belief about AI you strongly disagree with.
AI being the first port of call for any activity, I don't agree with that. I think you should use your brains. Maybe start with a pen and paper before you go to AI. But that's just me being a lunatic fringe on this.
So, one word to describe the future of enterprises.
Um, I don't know the word. I can probably say a phrase: mass level extinction if they're not careful.
Wow. Okay. No, Shobit, this was really good. Before I kind of conclude, I just wanted to say, as much as I enjoyed, I think I also learned through this session. I'm hoping to keep these conversations going. But thank you for making the time to be here with us. Truly enjoyed this conversation. And for those of you who are seeing, this is one more take, and watch out for more coming in this space very soon.